Welcome back to another bonus episode of Capes and Tights, a comic book and pop culture podcast. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. Today is Monday, May 2nd. It is the second day in Star Wars week here at Capes and Tights as we celebrate our love for Star Wars. So this is an episode, which is a bonus episode where we talk to Tony Fleecs, artist on Star Wars Adventures over at IDW Publishing. We talk a little bit how he got involved in it and so on and so forth. So make sure you listen and enjoy this episode and continue listening to Star Wars Week. Go back and listen to yesterday's episode on May 1st, which is Star Wars Facts. Tomorrow, we have a bonus guest coming at you here on Capes and Tights. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday are our reviews of Star Wars Episode 1, Episode 2, and Episode 3. And so enjoy the rest of Star Wars Week here at Capes and Tights and enjoy this episode featuring Tony Fleecs talking about Star Wars Adventures and his role in drawing the book. Enjoy, everybody. The idea of having to draw Star Wars. I mean, how did you get the job as a Star Wars artist?
So I've been drawing at that point My Little Pony for probably 6 years or so. And I was friendly with all the editors at IDW just because I live in California and they're in California. And so every once, two, 3 times a year, I'd see those guys and gals. But I just was working on ponies, and then sometimes they'd do like, Back to the Future or something, and I'd be like, oh, I love Back to the Future, let me do a cover on that. And they were sort of cool with that. But in my head, Star Wars was sort of like unreachable, and you hear about like Lucasfilm's approvals process, and so I just sort of was I decided it was probably impossible. And then I was down having lunch at IDW, and the editor at the time was Denton Tipton, who was editing that book, and I saw him, and we were just sort of catching up, and I was like, hey, if you ever want me to draw Star Wars, that's what I love. And they had, when they were going to get the license for the book, they had a bunch of people do pitches, like ideas that they had about what would be kids' Star Wars books. And at the time I was writing some My Little Pony stuff, and so they sort of were like, nurturing me as like a writer artist, somebody that worked for them. So they had me do a few pitches. I think I came up with like 3 or 4 ideas for like kids Star Wars books and drew little illustrations and stuff. So I guess after that, when they started doing the book and they didn't they didn't hire me to do any of that stuff, I was just like, oh, I guess that's a no. But yeah, at lunch I saw him and I was like, hey, I'd love to draw Star Wars. And he was like, oh yeah, I've got stuff. And then he was like, there's one that's like a Wampa story, and then there's one that's like a space race, like a drag racing story. Which one do you want to do? And I was like, oh, both. I want to do all of them. And he was like, oh, okay, sure. And so it was very easy. Like it's one of those things where I probably could have done it earlier if I just would have made a little more noise about it. Squeaky wheel gets the grease type of thing. So that was anticlimactic as far as like chasing your dreams goes, because it was much easier than I had feared.
I mean, and you got to, it's must be pretty badass to see that like C-3PO, R2-D2, you're drawing that kind of stuff too on IDW book. And I was such a like old school fan of like the Droids comics and the Ewok cartoons, stuff like that. And so at the time when they said Star Wars Kids, that's where my head went. Mm-hmm. I guess now when you think about it, you just be like, oh, Clone Wars or any of these. There's a million different styles that Star Wars Kids stuff look like, but like to me it looked like that, like Nelvana cartoon style. And so I was like, well, I want to draw my version of that. So when I would draw droids, they would look like the cartoon droids. I had a ton of fun with that. I like coming up with new stuff, or like, I drew Princess Leia in one of the issues, and it was like, well, she has to have a different costume than we've seen. So I'm like designing a costume for Princess Leia.
It was like nerdy, fun stuff. It was like stuff where I would freak out about it because I was just like, oh, this is so, here's Lando, but this is a time when we haven't seen him before, so he's probably got like a different outfit on, but it should be recognizable as Lando. Yeah, it was cool.
But I can imagine it being in the comic book aspect of it, of what Jon Favreau and David Filoni get to do nowadays. They get to play with big toys that they never used to be. Like, like the idea that like they get to put on Mandalorian TV shows, but like you creating character outfits is like, this is what I grew up watching, and now I get to actually play with these toys, like not just toys on my desk, but like the big toys. Like this is going to be sold in comic book stores, and I get to actually create these things. And I can imagine that would have been a kind of a pinch me moment as well for you, even though you have, this is not your first piece of artwork and things that have been out there. It's just must be
it definitely was that. Like it was. Hold on, I got an airplane going overhead. It was definitely the high point of, things would come out like that Gwen Stacy you showed. Like I was very psyched about that. Or the first time I drew like Ninja Turtles or something like that, stuff would come out where I would be freaked out about it. But Star Wars was the one where I was sort of like starstruck about it. And yeah, a much smaller and more contained version of what Jon Favreau is doing, like they're creating whole stories and worlds and stuff. I was just sort of like coming up with, what would Lando Calrissian's other outfit look like?
Yeah. But I mean, it's like I said, but you're in your avenue too. It's not like, you're not the creator of a TV show. You are drawing comic books. So this is what you're good at, and this is what you're doing. So now it's in your avenue, and you get to do something like this